Here again, and I'm going to share my screen really quickly with everyone online. Was just reading a disturbing story about how extremists in America are using irony to spread hate. You know, not great. All right, so here we go. First of all, welcome back, everybody. Good to see you. I hope you had a great weekend. We were out at the soccer fields on Saturday and Sunday, and so it was great to be outside. I hope you got some time to get out and do some things with your weekend as well. Our agenda for today is just really quickly to introduce a few more questions that we might contemplate as we think about the philosophy of history. And then I'm going to ask for your comments and thoughts on the assignment that I gave you on Thursday, Keegan's History as a Novel. I've read through your comments and replied to your comments on Canvas, those of you that turned it in. But I would love to have a little bit of a class discussion about Keegan and what you think of his arguments. And then we're going to do a little read aloud together. That's right. We're doing a little read aloud together of this guy, Michael Conway, who says there are huge problems with your history classes and how they're taught. And he specifically wants us to think about some things, and you'll have an assignment to do that I'm going to give you a little longer to work on, just because it might be a little bit lengthier than normal. I don't anticipate that it would be, but it might take a little more deep thought for you. So I wanted to give you a little more time so you could think about it. Okay, great. So let's talk really quickly. Well, first of all, I guess I should make sure. Beatrice, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you all right.
Okay, Garen, would you mind saying something in a normal voice?
Hi.
Okay, Beatrice, could you hear Garen's?
I can hear him, but it's a little muffled. So if there's really bad enunciation, we're not going to be able to understand.
Okay.
No, Warren.
Could you hear mine? No? Okay. All right, so we'll just try to enunciate. I got my special microphone, but well, maybe, you know what? Maybe I just need to pump up the volume. Let's try to pump up the volume. Okay, I got the volume maxed. Okay, so again, in our reflection journal, we're picking up where we left off last time. And again, I just, you know, if you want to write down some of these questions, I think it'd be great, right? Because you may wind up using these in assessments later. We've talked about this a little bit. How do we handle the selectivity in history? Well, that was kind of what I was meaning to simulate with your memories, where we chose one person's memory from the group, and then one person's memory from the class, and then we did a thought experiment where we extrapolated that to the state, to the nation. You know, not everybody's memories get recorded. And so how do we deal with that selectivity in the past and what becomes history? How do we select the right lens to view history from? Okay, 1 million bonus points to anyone who can tell me what the acronym Persian stands for when studying history. This is for 1 million bonus points. Alay's excited. She's like, give me that million. Okay, Christian's hand is up. Christian, can you take me through Persian?
Political, economic, religious, society. Really don't tell me.
Uh-oh, the million's on the line.
Italian.
No, it's not Italian. Can you pick it up, Ritesh?
Intellectual, art, and
Near and
Yeah.
same time.
Near and same time as. How did they? Okay. So great. So this is an acronym that Tolman or Broderick or whoever you encountered first in WAF, they taught you this group. And the whole point of this, right, is to get you to think about analyzing history from a variety of different perspectives, right? You could look at the political history of a place, you could look at the economic history of the place, so on and so forth, right? And so when we're studying history, when we're putting forth a history for people to understand, right, we may be selecting a lens or lenses through which to view that. And we'll talk about that more today as we look at the Conway group. How many of you had a little bit of like a little PTSD flashback when I said Persian? Yeah, okay, a couple of you, okay. My daughter, I think, right at this point, she's a freshman right now, Talmud's class, I think if I said Persian, she'd be, little flinch, just a little flinch. Another question that we might think about is how should historians carry out responsible historical comparisons? You know, is it responsible to compare groups across time and space? If and when should that be done responsibly? How do we do that responsibly? You often hear people think about this question: can we judge people in the past by our current moral standards? Do you have a thought on that? Can we judge the founding fathers because they were slave holders in many cases? Or do we give them a pass because that's just what was normal at the time? Isaac, what are your thoughts?
I definitely think that you can't simply judge people according to standards that you apply, because they're living by standards that are to their specific time periods, not as it developed as we do now. So for founding fathers, many of just the social norms were much different then than it is now. I think that's
Okay, Isaac says generally no. If you couldn't hear online, he says generally no, we can't hold people to the same standards. They were living in different times. Things have changed. Elias, Claire, what are your thoughts?
I feel like you can understand, like, oh, society was back then. I understand why he acted the way, but one thing understanding, I think justifying. So you wouldn't be right to say, oh, he did this wrong action. Oh, it was just because it's not. It's all right, because no matter what, we're evolving, but there's always the right thing, right? And that right thing, we just realize what it is, and then we realize that we've been doing the wrong thing.
Were there people alive at the time of Washington, Jefferson, Adams that thought slavery was wrong?
Yeah.
Right? So maybe we can't judge them. Claire, what do you think?
I agree with Elias. I think that like you can still understand and try to be like empathetic or whatever from where people are coming from, as you should nowadays, from like where your culture and where you're born affects your own opinions. But that doesn't mean that you should give people a free pass, even if they were and a long time ago. Whenever you're evaluating their accomplishments or what good, what bad things they put into the world, you should still evaluate them by today's standards.
Okay. Claire's making an argument that yes, we probably should. I mean, as hard as it is maybe to look at different cultures across time and space. Those of you that are online, Lee, Beatrice, Ale, Ethan, John, do any of you want to jump in on this conversation? How do you feel about this idea of judging folks from the past by the standards of today? Lee, go for it.
Yeah, I sort of agree with what everybody else says, where you can't really judge other people based on today's standards in the past, but at the same time, it's sort of hard not to. And I don't think they should necessarily be given a pass, especially for something that was like really negative and they sort of knew it was negative, even though that negative thing was more appropriate at that time. It still shouldn't be given a pass.
Okay, so again, you say no one gets a free pass, especially in cases or instances where there were dissenting opinions and a variety of opinions. Okay, excellent. Let me just scan the online folks real quick to see if anybody else had their hand raised. Doesn't look like it though. Okay, well let's move on. What are the acceptable sources for our histories? What are we allowed to be entered into the record books? Primary sources, okay, cool. Tax collection records, right? Census data, right? Speeches, right? Newspaper articles, sure. All that's cool, right? How about memories? People's journals, their reflections? Do we allow those into the recording of history? How about straight up opinions or personal judgments? Okay, sure, maybe those have a role in history, right? In what ways or in what places? How do we account for the collective memory that people share and the way powerful institutions attempt to construct that collective memory? Who knows the story about George Washington and the cherry tree? You heard the story of George Washington. Can anyone summarize the story of George Washington and the cherry tree? Yeah, Claire?
He cut down a cherry tree when he was younger. Most of the story did not happen because he felt like it. And then when his dad was like, hey, yo, did you cut down this cherry tree? He was like, I cannot tell a lie. I did.
Great. What's the point of the story?
He was an honest person.
There you go. George Washington was a virtuous man from the jump. When he was 6 years old, he got a hatchet from his dad. He chopped down a cherry tree in the yard. His dad said, what are you doing? He said, I apologize. I cannot tell a lie. It was me. I did it. Did that actually happen?
No.
No. It is a total fabrication made up by his first biographer in like 1799 or whatever. Right? But it lives in our collective memory, right? Because it helps shape a narrative that we want to employ. Elias, what do you think?
Like collective, you mean like people or?
Yeah, like these memories we share as a culture or as a nation or as a group, right?
Yeah.
So not like personal memories, but things we share together.
Yeah, I think when you first, plus they're acceptable, right? Doesn't have to be the best. Like people might say the problem with memories, and I think it goes back to the Washington story. It's how do we know it's true? How do we know, right? So I feel like talking about collective memory, it's like that movie that there's a map, but you need all of the sheets and you have to put them to light. So it's kind of saying you need to kind of compare the memories of everybody, and some things are gonna align. And you can be like, okay, this is what actually happened. And the things that don't align, you can either put as bias. So I think we just account it by kind of like checking on it and kind of checking how everything lines up, people's stories.
Do you agree with my premise? I'm putting a premise forward. I want to ask you, right? You should never take Mr. Hodson at his word, right? We got to think critically in this class. Do you think powerful institutions attempt to shape our collective memory?
Yeah.
Governments, companies, right? Can you think of an example
Yeah.
of where this you might, yeah, Claire.
Absolutely. I don't know how well of a job I'm gonna do of telling the story, because I forgot the name. But, recently, there was some like posts online from, like the United States, armed forces or whatever, and the NFL talking about a man who died in the early 2000s while fighting overseas. He like retired from being a football player. I've forgotten his name completely, which is bad. But all those, but they would always bring that up every year, leaving out the part of the story where he completely changed his mind on wanting to be in the war and saw it as immoral and was killed by friendly fire while he was over there.
Yes, and I'm blanking on that
Yeah.
player and soldier's name as well. Sophie?
It's Pat Tillman.
Pat Tillman, thank you, that's exactly right. Thank you for saving us there. Yeah, great example, right? So institutions, they have a vested interest in helping us remember history a particular way, right? So how do we account for that? How do we account for that? How do we account for the infinite experiences that we use to create a general understanding, right? Again, sort of simulated through this idea that we did in class, where we took one of your memories, right? There's an infinite number of data points, maybe not literally infinite, but for our intents and purposes, practically infinite, right? So how do we account for that as we try to attempt to understand history more broadly? Here's one of my favorite questions. Do the times make the people, or do the people make the times? Was Dr. King a product of the civil rights movement, or did Dr. King help create what we now consider the civil rights movement? Could the civil rights movement have existed without Dr. King? Or how would it have looked? Could Dr. King have existed without the civil rights movement? All right, how do we separate the person from the times? Thoughts on that? Isaac, Christian?
Honestly, at least the way I see it, I would think it could depend on whether it's one or the other. Remember, on AP US history, we used to talk about how different presidents they represented their time period and how time period represented them. I don't have a sure right
Great. Isaac argues that it could be either or. You could look at it from either perspective. Christian?
It just seemed like I'd never really asked those questions before. And while I don't have like a definite answer on my opinion, I don't think Dr. King would have been like, I don't think he would have gotten the fame, the recognition as a pastor without the civil rights movement. But I think the civil rights movement would have still existed with other people. Besides Dr. King, there are many other people involved with that. But you could play the same game with all those people. If you
Absolutely.
got rid of all of them, then yes, I think the civil rights movement.
Yeah, you can do it with any of these great people from history. Like, had they been born a decade earlier or a decade later, or a century earlier or a century later, would they have still achieved greatness? You know, I mean, again, it's a counterfactual discussion, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. Emma, what do you think?
I think we're thinking of hand in hand, like the people led to the era because like they created the any advancements in technology, if they needed the resources, so the time kind of got the resources and the people kind of used the resources to their advantage and hopefully for future.
So you come down on the side of it's a little more of the times making the people, because there's certain resources they needed.
But they can go hand in hand.
Oh, they go hand in hand. Yes, okay, yes. Okay, very good TOK answer. Does history possess directionality? And what I mean by this is there something we could call historical progress? Can we look at the story of history and say things are getting better? Or we're moving in the right direction? Or does it have directionality? Elias, what do you think?
You're off. I think they're showing progress. So this doesn't mean I believe this. I think it's an idea, but you could visualize like the additionality and progress of history like this, right? It's like it goes up and down, but overall it's going up, which is positive. Because here's the directionality. Something happens and something counter, like opposite to it happens. Here's an example, like the Reformation. No. If you're, yeah, and then there was a counter one. We also have it in like throughout the American history. We have democratic times. Oh, too liberal. Oh, we have to go back. So it kind of goes back and forth. And you can have so many examples, but overall, we keep learning, and I think we're like, I can say we're learning. Definitely, there's some problems, but there are some problems that are getting better because of the mistakes.
Did you know, according to many human rights organizations around the world, there are approximately 4 times as many people enslaved right now in the world than were ever enslaved during the period of chattel slavery and transatlantic slave trade.
There's a lot more people.
There are a lot more people too, Dylan. But again, we might be inclined to say we're making progress, right? We know slavery is bad, but then we look at the world and there seems to be a whole lot of slavery. I mean, I'm not saying we aren't. Elias is making this general trajectory is towards good, with up and
I
down
wouldn't even say
fluctuation.
like that's specified to a problem, because I think as we go, we also new problems arise, like with technology, right? So I don't think that's overall history, because you can't say things are getting better, there's some things getting better, some things getting worse, right?
Right. So we're not getting better?
I know.
I think we peaked.
I feel like we're
I think we peaked
We're
about
good.
like,
The day you were born?
no,
No.
I think we peaked like 3000 BC.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't think it's-
okay. All right, Dylan says we peaked
I
about
don't know,
five.
I mean,
5,000
I'm a very like, I wish the world was like we're like primal, we have tribes and there's T-Rexes. not even as like a joke, like I honestly think the world would be better off if we didn't have any, like if we were still using spears and.
Oh.
Okay, you might need to come in and sit on my
Start
senior
writing.
class. We're having this kind of debate right now. It's interesting, Dylan. You know there'd be no Rolling Stones.
Yes, I know,
Oh.
unfortunately.
All
We
right,
can still yodel.
clarify the word on this one. Right.
I just think our like interpretation of the directionality of history. There's obviously a lot of bias because what we see as a good part of our history right now, like what we see as. I feel like you're usually gonna see more time as going upwards rather than going downwards. Because like what you value and what you see going good in the world is like what is put more emphasis on, I suppose, like, for example, now you're going to say, oh, you might say, oh, we're really looking up, things are going great now because, like, social progress has been getting a lot better in recent years. And that's something that is important and on a lot of people's minds, but other things have gotten much worse, like, issues with poverty and economic disparity. But I think that we're more inclined to think that history is moving in a positive direction just because we want to think that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, yes, social justice, bring it on. Environmental destruction, oops. Right? It's hard to know. It's hard to know. Here's another question. Are there themes to history? Are there such things as periods or eras? Did the Enlightenment really exist? Right? Did the Renaissance really exist? What day did the Renaissance begin on? What day did the Renaissance end on? You can't give me one. You can't give me one, right? Instead, you could say, well, vaguely, generally, this was the time in the, 14th and 15th century when Europe became reinterested in, class. Well, of course, cool, awesome. Lots of other stuff was going on then too. Why have we chosen that, right? I mean, it's not perhaps irrelevant, it's not perhaps arbitrary, but right, what does it mean to claim that there was a period of European history called the Enlightenment or the Renaissance? And then to the view that period in that time through that lens, through that perspective. Christian?
I'm of the opinion that you don't know you're living in a period classified like that. And, I don't think people will recognize that until many years later. There's things right now that we're living through. But 100 years from now, they might have a name for, the years 1980 to 2020. And most of us won't know what that is. But yeah, I think it's more for historians' convenience to classify things up. Just they think if we say, well, it's around the same time, we're gonna call it this, then it's easier for people to digest and for them to research.
I think you're absolutely right, right? These are tools created by historians to give things meaning, right? And that perhaps maybe isn't a bad thing, right? It just behooves us to think critically when the teacher says this was a period called the Renaissance, for you to think critically about, okay, well, who decided it was the Renaissance? Who decides when it ends and begins, right? Who decides what gets highlighted, right? Who decides? Are there larger lessons that we can learn from history? What is the point? What is the point of studying history? There have been wars for all of recorded time. We don't seem to be learning any lesson. There's been genocide. There's a genocide perhaps going on right now. We don't seem to be learning any lessons. Is there a point to studying history other than to dazzle people at a cocktail party with your knowledge about the Habsburgs, or to do well on Jeopardy when you're sitting on your couch like me? You're gonna press your kids. Dad's so smart. They never say that, by the way. I just.
Oh, gee, Pops, good fight again.
Gee Willikers, Papa, answer another one before the contestants. Dylan?
I think it might kind of just be, so that we don't forget what happened. We want to like make sure everyone knows and record it and make it like widespread knowledge so that the history of our race like isn't forgotten.
Mm.
I think it's kind of like like 9/11, like it's a tragic thing that happened and it'd be easier to forget it happened, so we don't have to think about it, and think about how it hurt us and all the people that died. But at the same time, we say never forget, and we try to remember it every single year, and like, so that we don't forget that it did happen, because it was important. And we don't want to forget all the people that died. We don't want to forget that our nation was attacked and that it could happen again, like things like that.
Yeah, okay, great. It adds to our culture and to our understanding of us as people, right? Great, I love it. Would you say that there is a larger lesson that we can learn from history? Can we use history to like learn how to prevent, preventable disasters like wars, like genocides, like political unrest? Like, no, no, oh no, oh no.
I just,
Okay, we'll get to your disagreement in a second, Christian. So Sophie, what do you think?
Well, I think kind of going off Dylan said to some degree, I think history, like the point of history is, while it may not work for everyone to prevent reoccurring issues that such as war, it does teach people that those things are wrong and the consequences of those events. And I think history allows people to understand their community and like where they came from. So I think it gives people an understanding of themselves, even if it may not expand to the whole world living in peace. I think it does give people some level of empathy, but also a level of understanding of where they come from.
Okay, so again, echoing Dylan's point about it gives you some context and cultural context about where you come from. But you're saying that maybe it doesn't specifically teach us in ways that we can prevent specific things. We learn general lessons about good and bad. Yeah. Okay, Christian, you wanted to politely disagree with Dylan.
yeah, I feel like we can learn quite a few lessons. I think one thing that you did bring up is 9/11, and that's the rationale for why we have the TSA more strict and that and stuff like that. But I think we can also put ourselves in the shoes of people during that time. What made I don't know, the Maltese emperor do the thing, whatever he did when the siege of Malta was taking place. So what made Rasputin such a horrible, or I don't know, what just like what was it? What can we learn from these people by putting ourselves in their shoes? I just think by studying that kind of stuff, we can relate to people from different generations and seem less distant. I said a whole bunch of words.
I feel like putting ourselves in the shoes though, like in certain cases, like we don't have all the facts just because it was so long ago. So I feel like we'd be like wrapping their shoelaces around it. Like we wouldn't really be in their shoes. We didn't know their thoughts and like stuff like that. But I do see that point.
We have a hard time even empathizing with the person sitting next to us in class.
Yeah.
Let alone with a historical figure that was operating hundreds of years
I
ago.
think it helps with imagination. I think especially in this day and age, we lose that because we're so focused, especially in high schools on memorizing this and memorizing that so we can get into college and do all this and we're just always in a hurry. But if we're studying history and we're thinking critically, we're building our imagination and making our brain think in ways that probably happen.
Oh, gosh. Okay, did you read the article for today ahead of time?
Did I really?
You're getting close, man. You're getting close. You're getting close. You're on mute till we read the article because I don't want you giving away the surprising. Just kidding. You're great. You're great. Okay, another quick question for you, right? Just to think about. Can we look at the study of history like we look at the study of the physical sciences? Are there cause and effects? Can we say, when this happens, this is the outcome, right? Can we put forth a hypothesis based on history to test its outcome, right? Questions. Are there rules, laws, or theories to understanding history, right? Can we apply general, or is it every situation too infinitely complex for us to draw out any general laws or theories? A quick thought on that, Mr. Munoz.
Yeah, quickly, you can definitely see patterns. I noticed that you said rules, laws, or theorems. Well, I do know what you said that because of patterns, of course. Now, I cannot say this, right? Or I can say it, but if you literally take it up word by word, then the answer is no to the question. I cannot say. every time there is discontent from the public, corruption, the cause is corruption, right? That like always, right, or will. Because then that's the law, right? It's something that's gonna happen no matter what, will happen. Now, Durham, I think Durham or theory is susceptible because that's something of chain of reasoning, right? It doesn't have to be true, like, so, like every single time, it's just something you notice over time.
Yeah, we get into the Clio dynamics, right?
Yeah.
From
Oh, yeah.
the article a couple classes ago, right? The whole point of that article was scientists trying to figure out if there are patterns to history. And this particular scientist saying he believes that there are. Church. Okay, if you would really quickly, let's go on into Canvas if you're not there already. We're going to go into our modules and we're going to find Conway, the problem with history classes. And it's going to ask you to click on an article and to make a copy. And you're of course going to say yes, because you're good students. Maybe. There we go. And it's going to bring up an article. This is from the Atlantic magazine from 2016, a little dated, but not too bad as academic resources go. We're going to do a little read aloud. I'd love someone online who feels comfortable reading that first paragraph for us. Can anybody do that?
I can.
Thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate you.
Before the release of Selma, I wonder how many people ever reflected on President Lyndon B. Johnson's attitude toward the 1965 marches in Selma. I wonder if anybody thought that conventional wisdom afforded him either too much or too little credit for the Voting Rights Act. I imagine that Johnson's legacy was not on the average American's radar until Selma ripped it into the public consciousness.
All right, let's pause there. Raise your hand if you've seen Selma, the movie. Okay, if you haven't, I greatly recommend it. Great movie. Okay, someone here in the room willing to read that second paragraph for us. Maybe someone we haven't heard from already today. Yes, Ritesh. Thank you, sir.
The movie compelled many Americans to reconsider their perception of Johnson. The curators of his legacy ambassadors of film were portraying the 35th president as a prickly antagonist to Martin Luther King Jr. The setting of the film unfairly reduces Johnson to an irascible politician who was forced by King into advancing the Voting Rights Act. Joseph A. Califano Jr., Johnson's top assistant for domestic affairs from 1965 to 1969, wrote in the Washington Post that Selma distorts these facts so considerably that the movie should be rolled out this Christmas and during the ensuing award season. Selma director Ava DuVernay fired back, tweeting that the notion that Selma was Lyndon Johnson's idea was jaw-dropping.
Thank you, Ritesh. So what's the argument that's developing here between Califano and Ava DuVernay? What are they beefing about? LBJ, great. Okay, what specifically what are they beefing about regarding LBJ? Yeah, what role he played in the events of Selma, right? Califano, who was LBJ's aide at the time, how does he want LBJ to be remembered? As playing a pivotal role in the events of Selma, right? As being out front as a civil rights leader. What's Ava DuVernay's portrayal doing? Showing LBJ as a bit of a thorn in Dr. King's side, rather than an ally, a bit of a hindrance. Someone online, can you give us the next paragraph, please? I love it, Beatrice. Thank you.
How can subjects such as this remain dormant for long periods of time only to be awakened by a critically acclaimed film? Califano is not the first, nor will he be the last to mount a defense of a historical figure who's shortchanged by a movie. After the 2012 release of Lincoln, U.S. Representative John Courtney, a Democrat from Connecticut, wrote to Steven Spielberg to complain that the film erroneously showed two of his state's legislators voting against the amendment that abolished slavery. The 2012 release of the Margaret Thatcher biopic, The Iron Lady, prompted Rob Wilson, a member of Parliament, to call for debate in the British House of Commons, claiming that its director, Philippa Lloyd, painted an intrusive and unfair picture of the former prime minister.
Well done, Beatrice. Again, just evidence that people beef about this all the time, how historical figures are portrayed in works of art. Let's go back to our in-person people. The next paragraph. A new voice. Dylan, not really a new voice, but we'll take you.
These partisans have not been hiding. They are only drawn into the public realm when fear is evoked. It is this same anxiety that's emerged in Oklahoma because of the new advanced placement U.S. history guidelines. In a later interview, Califano captured the root of that anxiety. Many of our young people get their view of history from films and television, he said. It's important for people who make movies that claim to be historically accurate to be accurate. When the established memory of figures and events from the past is challenged, but the defenders and opponents of that memory will fight to influence the young.
Okay, makes sense. People think if you're going to make a biopic about somebody, if you're going to make a documentary about something historical, you should be accurate with the history. I think we could agree with that. Of course, we're humans. There'll be mistakes made, like maybe Spielberg accidentally having Connecticut vote, one way instead of the other when it comes to the issue of slavery. My online folks, the next paragraph, the passion. Lee, thank you.
The passion and urgency with which these battles are fought reflect the misguided way history is taught in schools. Currently, most students learn history as a set narrative, a process that reinforces the mistaken idea that the past can be synthesized into a single standardized chronicle of several hundred pages. This teaching pretends that there's a uniform collective story, which is akin to saying everyone remembers the events the same. Yet history is anything but agreeable. It is not a collection of facts deemed to be official by scholars on high. It is a collection of historians exchanging different, often conflicting analyses. And rather than vainly seeking to transcend the inevitable clash of memories, American students would be better served by descending into a bog of conflict and learning the many histories that compose the American national story.
What? What? Let's continue. Califano is explicitly worried that future Americans will remember LBJ differently than he does. Oklahoma State Representative Dan Fisher, a Republican, appears worried that future Americans will have a different understanding of their country's past than he does too. Fisher recently introduced a bill that would have defunded AP US history in the state, claiming that the College Board, who runs the AP program, published a revised framework that harps on what is bad about America and fails to teach American exceptionalism. The controversial effort garnered a good deal of criticism, and Fisher has since backtracked on the legislation. The memories of Fisher, Califano, Courtney, and Wilson have collided with the memories of others. Perhaps Fisher offers the nation an opportunity to divorce, once and for all, memory from history. History may be an attempt to memorialize and preserve the past, but it is not memory. Memories can serve as primary sources, but they do not stand alone in history. A history is essentially a collection of memories analyzed and reduced into meaningful conclusions, but that collection depends on the memories chosen. Memories make for a risky foundation. As events further recede into the past, the facts are distorted or augmented by entirely new details. Something the NBC News anchor, Brian Williams, learned to devastating effect. Do you know what happened to Brian Williams?
Yeah. Didn't he like exaggerate stories?
Yes, so he was talking about being a correspondent in either Afghanistan or Iraq. I think it was Afghanistan. And he talked about how he was on a Chinook helicopter that took fire and how the pilot bravely landed the aircraft and whatever. Turned out it didn't happen, right? He was not on the helicopter. He did not survive getting shot at on the Chinook. He had conflated, his own memories of being in the war and being a correspondent with other stories he'd heard, right? Grossly apologized for his error. An individual who marched across the Edmund-Pettus Bridge probably remembers the events of Selma differently than someone who helped Johnson achieve legislation in Washington. Both people construct unique memories while informing perfectly valid histories. Just as there are a plurality of memories, so too there are a plurality of histories. Scholars who read a diverse set of historians who are all focused on the same specific period or event are engaging in historiography. I didn't encounter historiography until college, and it had the same effect on my opinion of textbooks that The Jungle had on consumers of pork. This approach exposes textbooks as nothing more than a compilation of histories that the authors deemed to be the most relevant and useful. In historiography, the barriers between historian and student is dropped, exposing a conflict-ridden landscape. A diplomatic historian approaches an event from the perspective of the most influential statesmen, who are often white men, analyzing the context, motives, and consequences of their decisions. A cultural historian peels back the objects, sights, and sounds of a period to uncover humanity's underlying emotions and anxieties. A Marxist historian adopts the lens of class conflict to explain the progress of events. There are intellectual historians, social historians, gender historians, among many others. Historians studying the same topic, and this is key, will draw different interpretations, sometimes radically so, depending on the sources they draw from. Fisher's bill captures high school students' inability to accept the absence of a single history and the coexistence of histories. In a recent analysis for The Atlantic about the controversy surrounding the AP framework and other history curricula, Jacoba Urist points out that history is about explaining and interpreting past events analytically. If students are really to learn and master these analytical tools, then it is absolutely essential that they read a diverse set of historians and learn how brilliant men and women who are scrutinizing the same topic can reach different conclusions. Rather than constructing a curriculum based on the muddled consensus of boards, legislatures, and think tanks, schools should teach students history through historiography. The shortcomings of one historian become apparent after reading the work of another on the list. Will every perspective be afforded its due? Probably not, but the students will be better equipped to recognize weaknesses in an argument and resist the allure of a simplified national narrative. Although, as Erst notes, the AP course is quote unquote designed to teach students how to think like historians, my own experience in the class suggests that it fails to achieve that goal. The course's framework has always served as an outline of important concepts aiming to allow educators flexibility in how to teach, but it makes no reference to historiographical conflicts. Historiography was an epiphany for me because I had never before come face to face with how historians think and reason, how they construct an argument, what sources animate that approach, and how their positions respond to other historians. See if this resonates with your experience. When I took AP US history, I jumbled these diverse histories into one indistinctive narrative. Although the test involved open-ended essay questions, I was taught the graders were looking for a firm thesis, forcing students to adopt a side. The AP test also, unsurprisingly, rewards students who cite a wealth of supporting details. By the time I took the test in 2009, I was a master at checking boxes, weighing political factors equally against those involving socioeconomic, and ensuring that previously neglected populations like women and ethnic minorities received their due. I did not know that I was pulling ideas from different historiographical traditions. I still subscribed to the idea of a prevailing national narrative and served as an unwitting sponsor of
Good
synthesis,
afternoon, North Central.
oblivious to the academic battles that made such synthesis impossible. On your own, finish the last couple of paragraphs of the reading. It's going to ask you to write a letter to your favorite history teacher, doing one of two things. Either endorsing the conclusions of this author, that you need to be taught history differently, or telling your teacher, no, don't listen to this guy. We want to talk about the single narrative. This is going to be a hot mess. Okay, so your opinion on this guy's thoughts. If you want, send that letter to your favorite history teacher. See what he or she has to think. That could be interesting. It could be really interesting. Not a requirement though.
Mr. Thomas comes up.
All right, those of you online, I love you. Thanks for your participation today. We'll see you soon.